Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Ann, and today I have an interview for you with my friend Lindsey Hornkohl. Say hi, Lindsey.
Hi.
You guys might remember her from season 1. I think she was maybe like the second episode I ever did. Yep. And we talked about mental health in the church and why Jesus cares about your mental health. And last week, when Jess and I talked about busy families and needing to have rest and Sabbath, Lindsey messaged me and said, I need to talk about this too. And so because we're good friends, I said, sure, you can come and talk about it on the podcast. No problem. And it worked out well while Jess is on a break. So welcome back, Lindsey. And today we have a really important topic, which is Sabbath. We have been talking over the past few weeks about the problem of busyness and how it impacts our souls, how it impacts our families, and what we can do to do better with our families to protect our kids' mental health, to protect our own sanity. And a big part of that as believers who care about our mental health is going to be figuring out what that really means to have a Sabbath. So, Lindsey, today I would invite you, and I know you don't have like a clear definition, but I would invite you to share with us, what is Sabbath?
This one's hard for me because my husband's a pastor. And Sunday's a work day, and it's a hard day, and it's a real spiritual warfare in our family day. Like, that's common for a lot of people. But what I've come to understand is that Sabbath has to be a disciplined day, whether that's from sunup to sundown, or it's from sundown one day to sundown the next day. It's a disciplined day to set aside. It's sanctified. It's made holy for the Lord. And it's a command. It's a command for followers of Jesus to make that day different, not just in our behavior, but in our hearts and in our awareness. And so maybe even that's kind of lofty talk, lofty speak, but I think that it can't, you know what, it can't be a day like every other day, but we just happen to go to church in the morning or in the evening. It needs to be a day where we find that I'll launch into this part because to me, it has to do with what Sabbath is. Sabbath is, in my recent understanding, it's an invitation to experience heaven. You and I were talking just before this about how it's really a practice for being in heaven in eternity with God. And so he's asking us to come be with him. That's the best part of heaven. There's going to be great stuff in heaven. Maybe we're going to be feasting all day long. I will probably be making art all day long. The best part of heaven is that we get to be with Jesus all day, every day in his presence. And he's asking us to set aside a day to practice that, to put aside everything else that we do. He gives us total freedom, to do and be whatever we want, to pursue our own interests, to flesh out our personality in the world, to contribute to the kingdom here on earth. And on Sabbath, it's our opportunity to practice being with God in an intimate and holy way. So it's really practice for heaven. And if that doesn't sound appealing, then what are we so excited about heaven for?
Yeah.
I long to go to heaven. I'm so excited to fold up this body like a tent, like Paul says, and be on my way and get a new body and be with Jesus. but it doesn't excite me to do that on Sunday because I'm feeling like I got all the boxes to check, right? And I have to finish all the things and all the stuff that I didn't get done during the rest of the week. I need to get done today on Sunday. Or for me, I have to do my homeschool planning on Sunday night, or I have to plan for my class, my fitness class that I'm going to teach on Monday morning. And that's not a Sabbath. That's not a Sabbath. So,
so that's a good transition a little bit here. What is Sabbath not? Let's go there. Like, let's define what Sabbath is not based on, you and I both grew up in Christian families. And so we have 40 years of learning what Sabbath is in Christian culture. But what do we do? What do we think Sabbath is that it's not really?
Yeah. Okay. Let me answer that in a couple of different creative ways. When I was little, I grew up in the South and we went to a Baptist church and we got to wear, gloves, little white gloves. This was the 80s, right? And on Easter, I had my little hat and my purse. And I asked my dad one day, why do we have to go to church? And he said, oh, no, baby, we get to go to church. This is a get to. And he said it with the biggest smile on his face. And if I'm honest, and we didn't watch TV, by the way, but my parents had it right. It wasn't what you don't do that day. It was why we're not doing it. So we didn't watch TV. We didn't play with friends. We dressed a little differently. And the whole point was so that we could remember that this day is different from all the other days. So I suppose you could do all that stuff. I grew up in a place where all the stores were closed on Sundays. But if my heart doesn't change and I'm going through the motions and I go to church, but I scream at my kids and I don't go out to eat, but I sure as heck shop on Amazon. And, it's a heart place where I am truly setting this aside a day, and it's got to be for the right motivation. So it's not just going to church on Sunday morning and then having the rest of the day to myself. That's what it's not.
Yeah. I can remember growing up learning the 10 Commandments, and it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And so as a kid, when you learn, well, what does it mean to keep a day holy? I feel like what I remember was, well, that means you go to church. That's how you make it holy. It's like adding church in, you know? And so learning more about Sabbath as a day of rest, even though back in the, first part of Genesis, it says, God rested. We see that as the template for it. But then when we get to the 10 Commandments, we say, make it holy. And we focus on the worship part, not the rest part. At least in my upbringing, that seemed like what it was. So now when I'm trying to disciple my kids around the idea of what Sabbath is, it's, yes, we go to church and we also host our small group, which does involve some work for us. But what that means to create the rest of the Sabbath day is that we're not planning extra errands, or we're not saving all the housework till the last minute before the people come over. We're not doing the grocery shopping and all the things that you do on a catch-up day. We're not using that as a catch-up day. We're using it as a day where we worship and rest.
Yeah. And let's also point out, I know about you, you like to host people. You like to cook for people. So for you, that's not hard and a bunch of extra work.
Yeah. Well, that's one of those things where, yes, it is work. And if I had to pick between that and, let's say, dusting, I would much rather cook for people. But it's not, we have 30 people in our house every Sunday. So it's not like it's scot-free, but it's a joyful act of service on that
And
day.
Isn't that what Jesus did on the Sabbath? I mean, he healed people. He wasn't dusting.
Yeah.
It
was not dusting. That's
and
not
and
holy.
Actually, I think dusting's not holy. Did you hear that? And we have this misnomer that you shouldn't do any work at all on a Sunday, and you really should just sit on the couch and watch football and scroll on your phone. And that's also not what rest is. That's not serves no eternal purpose. And it's also not sleeping, although Sundays are a great day to take naps. I think that would be a wonderful practice I've tried it before, and it's a discipline. It really is. But your restful day, your hosting of your friends, does serve an eternal purpose. So it's not terribly hard for you. It's an internal investment, and you feel filled up when you've done it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not a catch-up day. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. So Jess and I are going to come back around and talk about this a little bit more about how we apply this in our families. But for us, Sabbath is kind of new to us, even though both my husband and I grew up in the church and we always have known about the Sabbath day. To actually set that time aside and not mow the lawn and not do the grocery shopping and not do all those things that we do on a catch-up day, that's a new practice for us. Yeah. So we've always gone to church, but we haven't always rested. So yeah. I am still in the process of figuring out what that looks like for a family with 3 young children.
Yeah. Me too. And a lot of our pastor friends, they would Sabbath on a Monday. Mm-hmm. So, they would make sure that Mondays were set aside. And that's really easy. That's an easy day to not be interrupted by a bunch of things. Saturday is much harder. Mm-hmm. But if you have kids in school and that's your family's practice, they don't get to Sabbath if they're going to school on a Monday. Mm-hmm. So even though they're not doing as much work as you, they're not watching you. And I think that's so important. Your kids are watching you guys make these decisions. And to be honest, if we've got too much work to do in 6 days, then we're doing too much work.
Yeah.
So,
or we're not
being efficient wisely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Or too much play,
Mm-hmm. So let's just do a real quick survey of what are point us to some of the scriptures that would inform how we think about Sabbath, not just as a, Old Testament Jewish law, but also as New Covenant people. Like how do we conceptualize this?
Yeah, I came across Hebrews 4, well, the end of Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4. And I came across it in the Passion Translation, but my New Living Translation isn't as, it's not that far off either. Mm-hmm. And both of them talk about how at the end of chapter 3, the Israelites didn't get to enter the promised land, which was God's promised rest. Mm-hmm. And it was because they were disobedient and they didn't trust him. They didn't have that faith that afforded them that rest. And then chapter 4 goes on to talk about how God's promise of rest still stands. So whether it was for the Israelites entering the promised land or the metaphor for us where heaven is the promised land, the ultimate promise, mm-hmm. rest is what's afforded to us. But if they didn't get to enter because of their disobedience and rebellion, that's what led to unrest. So we could really draw that conclusion for ourselves that disobedience and rebellion leads to unrest and ultimately death outside of rest. And so when you and I are looking for a prescription for rest, like we feel it, right? You and I have talked about this. Mm-hmm. I think in general, it's not just the church that feels it, but our culture feels it. We need some rest. We need to have this steam, be let out. And a lot of us are seeking rest in a very, very real and desperate way. And so when I'm looking for, how do I do that? Mm-hmm. I know I need rest. I have this self-awareness. I know that God has commanded it. I know that he's called me into Sabbath with him, but I just don't know how to get there. So we can take a step back, and it's not something that we ought to create for ourselves or, come up with a plan for how to get rest. Stop doing this and add this. And, it's not an addition or subtraction problem. really what it is obeying God and trusting God. But how can we obey if we're not listening?
Mm-hmm. And how can
And
we listen if we're not resting
how can
and
we
getting
listen if we're
quiet?
not resting? Yeah. So it's a discipline, and it really does start with, I'm a big fan of fake it till you make it. I am a big fan. And really what that is posturing my my body and my mind in a space where my soul can then come follow.
Mm.
So practically what that means is I am going to get my body up out of bed and go find that quiet place. Right now it's in my bathroom because I can close that door and no one's going to bother me. And I can open up my Bible and I can put my mind in the right place. Then what I'm hoping and praying is that the Holy Spirit shows up and he creates that space of, I've created this space, and he's going to fill it with rest.
Mm-hmm.
So then what I can do is in that, I can build on it.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I'm there, I can say, okay, speak to me. I'm trying my hardest to listen to you. And then he'll talk. And then I can have the choice of whether or not to obey. And my obedience will then put me in this place of rest. It's a natural consequence. It's not some works-based blessing necessarily. But I believe that it's really a natural consequence. If I just let my good do the fathering, do the work, then I get to be the kid that rests. I don't have to carry all of his problems. I think that is really where we need to start, is slowing down enough to listen a little bit, and then having the faith and trust to obey when he says something.
Mm-hmm.
And then the obedience brings the rest. And then the rest gives more space to be able to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And we just keep saying yes. And then we'll find that in the end, that natural outpouring, that natural consequence is the rest that follows. So that is what I got from chapter 4 of Hebrews. And that has been rolling around in my head for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I was just looking at it right now. It says in verse 11, this is Hebrews 4:11. It says, and this is New Living Translation. It says, so let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. So it's kind of wrapping up what Lindsey was just saying, that we try, we do our best to enter the rest that God is providing for us. And so what might that look like in your life? If you've listened to the Soul Grit podcast for even one episode, you know my guests and I believe that when we integrate the power of God with the wisdom of modern psychology, we get supercharged healing, change, and growth in counseling. As a Christian therapist, however, I realize that there are many practitioners out there who are personally Christians but don't know how to integrate their faith into their counseling practices. That's why I created the e-course, Faith Integration for Therapists. In this premium 5-module course, therapists who love Jesus will learn everything from understanding their calling, to marketing their practices to Christians, to adapting evidence-based interventions to honor our faith. You can learn more about the online course at www.soulgritresources.com/courses and send an email to info@soulgritresources.com to receive a discount code. One of the things that I thought was a really interesting concept, I heard it a year or two ago on a different podcast, is that if your work is physical, then your rest needs to be mental. And if your work is mental, then your rest needs to be physical. So like flesh that out a little bit. If your job is digging ditches or building homes or chasing children around, then your rest needs to be mental, in that you need to create more space for your mind and your heart and your soul to just absorb new stuff, ponder over old stuff, reflect, and be with God. Whereas if you're in a job where you're behind a computer screen all day, or you're thinking through really difficult problems, or like me sitting in a chair listening to other people's problems, then my rest needs to be physical, which means I need to get outside and go for a walk, or I need to move my body and do some kickboxing or lift some weights, or get into like recreational play with my body. And so
Mm-hmm.
depending on how active your job is, or your daily life, and I'm saying job, including like what you do. You might be a retired person, or you might be a stay-at-home mom, or whatever that is. Like balance out what you do in your work time with something that complements it in your rest time. So for me, that has really been getting to use my body more. And so now I didn't even see this before, but now when I see a stressed out person, I say, like, you want to do some punches, or like you want to lift something real heavy with me?
That's right.
Because I didn't know that before.
Yeah,
And now that I've experienced it, I know that like God designed our bodies to be in that balance of work and rest.
I love that. And you know what I love about that is that there's freedom in the body of Christ to be and do our worship differently. But
Mm-hmm.
it's set aside, it's different, it's sanctified. It's different from every other day.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned to me that when we read Genesis and it said God did all this work in 6 days, and then on the seventh day he rested, like his work is complete. I get to rest now. And you and I never feel like our work is
Mm-mm.
complete. Like
Mm-mm.
there's always something else we could have done or
Mm-hmm.
cleaned or shopped for or messaged about, or, there's always something else. And so, but the point is that God didn't just stop for all time after 6 days. He obviously
Yeah,
was
yeah,
to work. He never left his people without him. So he got about different work, but he did it from a posture of rest. And
yeah.
this is also something that I have learned probably through Revelation Wellness. Like certain catchphrases get stuck in our heads as we're doing the workouts, but um, the idea like resting is not quitting, that quitting and resting are two different things. And so you work until you need to rest, and then you rest until you can work again.
That's
And
exactly right. Isn't that so freeing?
yeah. So we always do our work from a position of rest. And I mean, if you've ever done a workout with us, you'll know that it starts from that position, but we always end up in a position of rest as well, because once we've worked out our bodies, then our minds are open to hear from God. So
Absolutely.
it's it's impactful to do it both in your intellectual life, your work or professional life, and then also in your physical. The manifestation of your self in the world is your body.
Yeah,
Do that in
yeah,
all those places.
yeah, absolutely. And I do keep thinking about the idea of the fact that our work is never finished. And because I can read that, on the sixth day, God looked at his work and said it was good, and he rested because his work was finished. And actually, chapter 2, verse 2 of Genesis says, on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested. So it was actually holy because he rested. It wasn't holy in and of itself, and then he kept working right through it. It was only holy because he rested.
Mm-hmm.
And he declared that for us as well. But because of the fall, part of the curse that Adam felt was that he had to constantly toil and he had to constantly work. And by the sweat of your brow, you will have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made. All your life, you'll struggle to scratch a living from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually the effects of sin that we feel. And whenever we can stand our ground against the effects of sin, it will always be there. But whenever we can declare our righteousness in God, then what we get to do is we can say, I'm not going to let sin have its say over me. I'm going to choose to stop and rest from my work. Even though I know there's going to still be more to do tomorrow morning, I'm going to choose to trust God that he will take care of that and that there will be enough time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get to, again, posture my body in a way that I want my soul to come along. And it's waging war against the unseen realms. And it's saying, I know who I am. It's saying that I've been set free from the effects of sin because of Jesus Christ. not because of my works. I'm never going to rest if I keep trying to work through it, if I keep working through it, checking the boxes. So and in Hebrews, it says we have to be really careful to make sure that we get after that rest so that we don't miss it. So we have to be pretty intentional about this, because it's not going to happen on its own. We don't live in a culture anymore where stores are closed on Sundays. Baseball games and football games and all their schedules. It's just an extra Saturday now.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think it's important to point out that depending on how you're interpreting Jesus's work and new covenant, some people think that any of the laws that were stated in the Old Testament don't count anymore because Jesus died and he set us free from all of that. Yeah. And so I do want to point out that Jesus still kept the Sabbath. And I think the difference between the way that Jesus kept the Sabbath and the way the Pharisees kept the Sabbath was he still had his heart set for people on the Sabbath. And so he wasn't going to be rigid with the rules that the people had set up over the years about what you could and couldn't do, because his heart was people have abundant life. That's what the Sabbath is about. The other thing to notice is that God set the pattern for the Sabbath long before the law of Moses was ever given. So even though we see in the 10 Commandments, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, we actually had the template for that from the creation of the world. And so it doesn't pass away in the work that Jesus did, because it was already there before the law was given. However, we have no condemnation. So if we've been messing up Sabbath for 40 years, God's just inviting you to do it better.
That's right.
And not do it better for the sake of checking a box or looking good, but for the sake of being able to be with him and receive what he has that's best for you. Because that's what he wants for you.
And there's rest in that. I just think he's saying, would you do you want to hang out? No? Okay, I'll ask you again next week. I just feel like that's his heart. And when we say yes, we can walk away going, man, that was really good. Why don't we do that all the time? I just think his heart for us is so kind and gentle. And he, all throughout the Gospels, Jesus had compassion and was constantly drawn towards the hurting and the broken and the unrested people. And he didn't have condemnation for them. But he was also very serious about getting after his own rest. He healed on the Sabbath, but he had some pretty darn good boundaries too. Right. And, I think it's really hard in today's day and age to create those boundaries, because we want to play. We don't want to miss out. We want to enjoy. And we also kind of buy the lie that there's this false rest. There are things that look like rest that actually end up just stealing our rest. Things like, mindless scrolling and, vegging out on Netflix and reading a book that's not going to give you any life. So we do need to get intentional, and but we do it for love, and we do it looking for the relationship, and we do it because we know that even though it is countercultural and it's a discipline, when that discipline comes from a place of delight, there's absolute rest on the other side of it.
So Lindsey, in our last couple minutes here, why don't you recommend some resources for us? Where have you been learning about this?
The Bible, number one.
Okay, you get the Sunday points.
I know. No, I know. I mean, and that's just going to have to be the answer. There's a fantastic new podcast out that is a John Mark Comer project called Rule of Life. So far, I believe there's only 4 episodes out, but all 4 are on Sabbath. And it's just laid out beautifully. And they talk about a lot of things about Sabbath that I have never thought of before. So this is really, and you've been listening to that too. Is that right?
No, I've listened to his older stuff. I
He
haven't
talked,
quite got
yeah.
into that
Oh,
yet.
okay. So he's talked about Sabbath a lot before. Um, another book that I've actually been reading is Dane Ortland's
Oh, yeah.
Gentle and Lowly, The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. And it's really just reminding me that Jesus really likes me, and he's just so gentle and he's drawn towards me. But also, you and I both have mentioned Revelation Wellness, and you are now, can I say this? You are now a Revelation Wellness fitness teacher, gospel preacher,
Yep.
and officially you have the certificate.
I'm certified. Yes.
You're certified. One of your many letters after your name. We just finished up a challenge, a 21-day challenge. It's always there for people to buy. You can do it on your own. We just did it publicly as a group, but it's a 21-day challenge really based on rest, and it's called Project Stress Relief. And a part of that is that when we finish a public challenge, then all around the world, instructors can host meetups. And so there might be a meetup in your area. Several of them have already happened, but you can always go to the revelationwellness.org page and you can see if there are other meetups in your area. And if not, then you just go ahead and do the 21-day challenge on your own. And you and I, we're going to have a meetup here pretty soon where we
if
just
you
talk
are
about
local to us in Southern California area, we will be hosting the meetup in Lake Elsinore on November 12th in the afternoon. And so you are welcome to attend that. It's in Lake Elsinore, is really easily accessible from anywhere you are in Southern California. So we would invite you to come join us for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to do that at the Dream Center, and you can get a hold of Anne, or Dream Center Lake Elsinore has the information, or you can even find us on revelationwellness.org. But, I even if you don't have accountability, even if you don't really feel like you have time to read a book, I just would say, make a moment to say no to something so you can say yes to being slow and getting in the Word. And that's where the revelation happens. That's where the Holy Spirit talks to you about your family and highlights something to you and invites, never tells you or, impresses on. He invites us to make space for him, because he knows how much we need it and how enjoyable it is. And
he'll show up when you invite him.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are my recommendations.
So as people that love Jesus and care about our mental health, we're making those connections here that if we don't practice our lives in the way that God designed them to be, we are going to struggle with mental health and relationships and emotions, and even to break down in our bodies. If we don't do it the way that God designed it, that's what's going to happen. And so we're continuing to bring you resources that are going to help you live the way that God designed you to, so that your mental health will be as full and abundant as it could be. So thank you for being here. Lindsey, thank you for sharing your heart about this. And I know you probably have 3 more hours of stuff you could talk to us about Sabbath.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
About Jesus. That's her favorite thing. So
I could. Yeah. Thanks. Love you.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.